Power doesn't look the way most people expect it to. It doesn't come with loud confidence, perfect words, or dramatic gestures. More often, it shows up quietly through someone who says less but somehow controls the room, someone whose absence is felt more strongly than their presence, someone people keep thinking about long after the moment has passed. You've seen this before. Maybe you've even felt it, watching opportunities drift toward others while you stayed unnoticed, wondering why some people attract attention effortlessly while others try endlessly and still fall short. This isn't luck, and it isn't magic. It's a pattern. And once you recognize that pattern, you can never go back to seeing human interaction the same way again. The unsettling part is this: seduction is already happening around you, whether you participate consciously or not. Every day, people influence decisions, shape emotions, and pull others toward them without asking for permission. Not through manipulation, but through understanding of timing, desire, and restraint. Most people lose power not because they lack value, but because they reveal too much too soon, chase what should come to them, or confuse attention with connection. This book exposes why that happens. And as this story unfolds, you'll start noticing moments from your own life, conversations that shifted unexpectedly, people who had an impact far beyond their effort, situations where the balance of control quietly changed hands. But here, the tension that keeps this story dangerous and fascinating. Seduction is not about dominating others, it's about mastering yourself. The moment you rely on force, need, or validation, the spell breaks. The moment you understand why people respond the way they do, you're faced with a choice: remain unaware and be pulled by invisible strings, or become conscious of the dynamics shaping every interaction. The art of seduction is not teaching you how to take from others. It's revealing why attention, mystery, and presence have always shaped human behavior. And by the end of this journey, one question will follow you long after the video ends. If you've been playing this game your whole life without knowing the rules, what changes now that you do? Chapter 1: The Seductive Character. Every form of influence begins long before words are spoken. People respond first to what you project, not what you explain. Long before logic enters the picture, the mind decides whether someone is worth attention. This is where most people unknowingly lose power, by trying too hard to be agreeable, approachable, or impressive. In doing so, they blur their own presence. Seductive characters do the opposite. They don't aim to blend in or win approval. They commit fully to a distinct emotional signal. And once that signal is felt, people lean in, not because they're convinced, but because they're curious. Curiosity is the first quiet shift in control, and it happens before anyone realizes a choice has been made. Greene introduces the idea that seduction is not about adding layers, but about stripping away contradictions. When someone knows exactly who they are, others sense it immediately. The seductive character is not chaotic or scattered, they are centered. They emphasize one dominant quality: confidence, mystery, warmth, boldness, and allow everything else to support it. This clarity creates psychological comfort. People trust what feels consistent, even if they don't fully understand it. And here's the loop most miss: the clearer your identity becomes, the less you need to explain yourself, and the less you explain, the more people project meaning onto you. There's a subtle danger at this stage, and Greene is careful to reveal it. Many confuse seduction with performance, believing they must act like someone else to become magnetic. But forced charm collapses under pressure. The seductive character isn't fabricated, it's revealed. It's the version of you that shows up when insecurity stops interrupting expression. This is why imitation never lasts. People sense strain. They feel when someone is chasing an outcome instead of embodying a presence. True influence comes from alignment, not effort, and alignment is what makes attention feel effortless. What makes this concept unsettling is how often people sabotage themselves without realizing it. Oversharing, explaining intentions, seeking reassurance, these habits feel honest, but they drain intrigue. Greene explains that mystery isn't deception, it's restraint. When everything about you is immediately accessible, there's nothing left to discover. The seductive character understands when to speak and when to let silence do the work. Not because silence is powerful in itself, but because it invites interpretation. And interpretation is where emotional investment begins. This chapter ends with a quiet challenge, though it's never stated directly. If attraction and influence begin with identity, then the question isn't how others see you, it's how clearly you see yourself. The seductive character doesn't chase reactions, they allow reactions to come to them. And once that shift happens, something irreversible begins. People stop responding to what you want and start responding to who you are. This is the foundation. Everything that follows in this story builds on this single truth, and without it, nothing else works. Chapter 2: The Seductive Types. Once identity is established, seduction takes shape through pattern. Greene reveals that attraction is rarely random, it follows recognizable emotional signatures that repeat across history. People respond not just to who you are, but to how you make them feel. And those feelings tend to cluster. Some awaken desire through intensity, others through safety, others through mystery or excitement. This is where seduction becomes dangerous, not because it manipulates, but because it exposes how predictable human longing can be. When you understand these patterns, you start noticing them everywhere, including in moments where you once believed chemistry was spontaneous. Greene introduces the seductive types not as costumes to wear, but as mirrors. The siren draws attention by heightening the senses, pulling people out of routine and into feeling. The rake overwhelms through focus and emotional boldness, making others feel uniquely chosen. The ideal lover listens deeply and reflects unspoken desires back with precision. The natural disarms by refusing to perform at all, reminding others of freedom they forgot. Each type succeeds for the same reason: they activate something dormant. And once activated, people rarely question why they're drawn in, they just know they are. The mistake most people make at this stage is trying to adopt a type that doesn't belong to them. They force intensity where calm would be more powerful, or mystery where warmth would be more authentic. Greene warns that this creates internal friction, and friction leaks. People sense it? Seduction loses power the moment it feels calculated. The most effective approach is recognition, not imitation. When you lean into a natural tendency and sharpen it, the result feels effortless, and effortlessness is one of the strongest signals of confidence. There is also an ethical line quietly woven into this chapter. These types work not because others are weak, but because they speak to emotional needs that already exist. Seduction doesn't create desire from nothing, it gives shape to what's already there. This understanding places responsibility back on the seducer. Awareness increases power, but it also demands restraint. Influence without self-control becomes manipulation. Influence with awareness becomes presence. Greene doesn't spell this out directly, but the implication is clear. Mastery begins internally, not externally. By the end of this chapter, something shifts. You stop asking which type is best and start asking which one you've been suppressing. Because once you recognize your natural seductive pattern, you also recognize how often you've muted it to fit expectations. And that realization opens a new loop. If attraction is strongest when you amplify what already exists, then the real cost isn't rejection, it's dilution. And from this point forward, the story moves from identity to desire, because once people feel something, they begin to want more. Chapter 3: Creating Desire Through Absence. Desire does not grow through constant contact, it grows through contrast. Greene introduces one of the most uncomfortable truths in human interaction. What is always present loses emotional weight. People don't crave what they fully possess, they crave what feels just out of reach. This is where many lose influence without realizing it, believing that availability proves sincerity. In reality, it often signals a lack of boundaries. Seduction begins the moment presence becomes selective. And once absence is introduced with intention, the mind begins doing the work you no longer have to. Greene explains that absence is not disappearance, it is rhythm, advance and retreat, engagement and silence. When this rhythm is balanced, curiosity deepens. When it's broken, interest collapses. Too much presence suffocates desire, too much distance erases it. The seductive figure understands this instinctively. They know when to lean in and when to step back, not to provoke anxiety, but to preserve emotional energy. The space they leave behind becomes filled with thought, imagination, and anticipation. And anticipation, more than satisfaction, is what binds attention. There is a psychological mechanism at work here that Greene subtly exposes. The human mind dislikes unfinished experiences. When something ends too cleanly, it fades. When it feels unresolved, it lingers. Strategic absence creates an open loop: conversations that end early, interactions that hint rather than explain, moments that stop just before completion. This is not deception, it's discipline. Restraint communicates confidence. It says without words that your life does not orbit the moment, and that signal quietly shifts the balance of power. Most people sabotage this phase by reacting emotionally to the tension absence creates. They rush to fill silence, overclarify intentions, or seek reassurance when uncertainty appears. Greene warns that this urge comes from fear, not connection. Seduction collapses the moment need becomes visible. Absence is only powerful when it feels natural, not punitive or strategic. It must arise from a full life, not a calculated withdrawal. Otherwise, the space feels empty rather than charged. By the end of this chapter, the tone of the story darkens slightly. Absence reveals a truth most people resist. Influence increases when you stop chasing outcomes, when you allow others to move toward you instead. This is the moment where seduction stops being about action and becomes about control of impulse. And once that control is established, desire no longer needs to be created, it sustains itself. From here on, the stakes rise, because what begins as curiosity slowly turns into emotional dependence if handled without care. Chapter 4: The Power of Attention. In a world saturated with noise, attention has become the rarest currency. Greene makes it clear that seduction does not begin with attraction, it begins with focus. Most people listen only long enough to respond, not to understand. The seductive presence does something radically different. They make others feel momentarily singular. Not admired, not impressed, but noticed. This experience is subtle yet profound, because to be fully seen is to feel validated without needing approval. And once someone associates that feeling with you, emotional gravity begins to form. What makes attention so powerful is not intensity, but precision. Greene emphasizes that selective attention carries more weight than constant engagement. When you listen closely, remember small details, and respond to what matters rather than what's obvious, people feel understood in ways they can't easily explain. This is where seduction becomes psychological. You are no longer competing for interest. You are becoming the place where interest feels safe. And safety, when paired with curiosity, creates a bond stronger than excitement alone. However, this chapter also exposes a dangerous misconception. Attention is not flattery. Flattery seeks reaction. Attention creates connection. Many confuse the two and end up performing instead of perceiving. Greene warns that overvalidation cheapens presence. The seductive figure offers attention sparingly without expectation of return. This restraint prevents emotional inflation. It keeps the dynamic balanced. The moment attention is given to extract something, approval, affection, reassurance, it loses its power. There is an ethical tension woven quietly through this idea. When someone feels deeply seen, they become open. Vulnerability increases. Greene does not ignore this risk. He implies that awareness of another's emotional landscape creates responsibility. The seducer must manage not just influence but intention, because attention can heal but it can also bind. The difference lies in self-control. Without it, influence turns exploitative. With it, presence becomes grounding. By the end of this chapter, seduction has shifted from external behavior to internal discipline. You begin to see why attention changes people, not because it controls them, but because it reminds them of something they've been missing. And once that reminder is given, they seek it again. This is the point where attraction deepens into attachment. And from here forward, the story becomes less about creating desire and more about managing its weight, because what you awaken in others does not disappear on its own. Chapter 5: Emotional Triggers and Hidden Needs. At this stage, seduction no longer operates on the surface. Greene reveals that beneath every attraction lies an emotional hunger, often unspoken, often unresolved. People are guided less by what they say they want and more by what they're trying to soothe, prove, or recover. This is where influence becomes precise. The seductive figure does not impose desire, they recognize it. And recognition, when accurate, feels like understanding rather than intrusion. But this accuracy also raises the stakes, because knowing where someone is vulnerable gives you access to something they may not consciously protect. Greene explains that these hidden needs tend to repeat. Some seek reassurance, others significance, others escape. Many are driven by old disappointments or unrealized versions of themselves. Seduction works when it aligns with these inner narratives. When someone feels that you get them without forcing them to explain why, the bond accelerates. They don't feel persuaded, they feel discovered. And discovery is intoxicating. It bypasses logic and embeds itself emotionally, where resistance is weakest. This is where most people lose control of the dynamic on both sides. Those being influenced mistake emotional resonance for destiny. Those influencing mistake insight for entitlement. Greene warns, indirectly but firmly, that emotional triggers are not tools to exploit but signals to handle carefully. Influence without restraint creates dependency. Dependency breeds resentment. And resentment destroys the very power seduction seeks to build. Mastery here is not about pressing deeper, it's about knowing when to stop. The seductive presence maintains balance by remaining anchored in self-awareness. They do not mirror every emotion, nor do they rush to fill every gap. They allow others to feel without drowning in those feelings. This emotional steadiness becomes a form of quiet authority. People trust what feels contained, and containment paradoxically increases intensity, because when emotions are held rather than amplified, they grow clearer, not louder. By the end of this chapter, the story reaches a critical threshold. Desire has evolved into emotional investment. The connection feels meaningful, not just exciting. And this is the moment where seduction either matures into influence or collapses into manipulation. Greene leaves this tension unresolved on purpose because what follows depends entirely on timing. And timing, as the next chapter reveals, is where most people fail, even when everything else is working. Conclusion. By now, the pattern should feel unmistakable. Seduction was never about clever moves or calculated words, it was about awareness. Awareness of how presence shapes perception, how absence fuels desire, how attention creates attachment, and how emotional needs quietly guide behavior. Greene's deeper message is not about controlling others, but about understanding the invisible forces that have always shaped human connection. Once you see these forces clearly, you realize how often outcomes in life are decided long before logic enters the room. And that realization is both empowering and unsettling because it means neutrality is an illusion. You are either conscious of these dynamics or you are being moved by them. What makes this knowledge dangerous is not the power it gives, but the responsibility it demands. Influence without discipline leads to harm, often unintentionally. But influence with self-control becomes presence, clarity, and direction. The most seductive individuals are not those who take the most, but those who remain centered while others drift toward them. They don't chase validation. They don't rush outcomes. They understand that the strongest pull is created when you are fully grounded in yourself. And once you reach that point, you stop trying to be unforgettable. You simply become difficult to ignore. So here's the quiet question that closes the loop this story opened at the beginning. Now that you recognize these patterns, what will you do differently? Because this knowledge doesn't fade once you've seen it. You'll notice it in conversations, in silence, in moments where attention shifts without explanation. You can return to old habits and let these forces operate unconsciously, or you can move with intention. If this breakdown made you see something new, sit with it. Let it sharpen your awareness. And if you want to go deeper into understanding human nature, influence, and self-mastery, stay curious. Because the moment you stop chasing power is often the moment it starts working in your favor.